The Champagne political analyst brought something up. That lady who's like, I'm buying champagne, Madam President. You wasted your vote. I was like thinking about this, that I was like, okay, because it was fascinating, this idea. There's 18 million fewer voters. So how is this explained? And then the remainder of voters, it becomes this thing of, I guess they were racist and misogynistic or something like that. But that like 18 million just stayed home. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I was thinking about it, I'm like, and so I was sitting back like, okay, so this lady's really working hard to make this work in her brain. That a country that worshipped the ground Whitney Houston and Felicia Rashad walked on. Now, this is so old in a way, even though it's not. Most young people who think that they're media savvy and know their TV shows and music and cultural references, they would know Whitney Houston. They have no idea. Like, Whitney Houston was like a darling of music. She like dominated music. She was a star in movies. I think she was in multiple movies, but I know Bodyguard was like the key thing. This was huge. That song dominated the radio. It really starts to get a little bizarre when it's that, America hates black women. And it's like, but you can't name a female who is Asian American of note, there is no Whitney Houston of Asian Americans. Filipinos. Like, I mean, nobody even remembers who the Jets were. Let that one take a second to sink in. Like, wait a second, the Jets? Look it up. Tongans. Yes. These black kids look really weird. Oh, I guess we come in every color. No, they're Tongans. And then things like literally where guys who wrote black American pop songs just literally hire a bunch of kids from Boston, and you've got the beginning of the new boy band era with New Kids on the Block. This idea that America has this big hang-up about race is this fascinating thing constantly for my entire lifetime, coming from the left end of the Democrats. And that the Republicans will sort of bring up, or conservatives will bring up, like, sort of like this idea of like, well, I didn't really think of the person's race. I mean, what does that matter? And that's because it's the principle of the matter. It's the principle of the thing. What did this person do as an individual? Take a look. Amazing. Beautiful. Look at this. This isn't a video game. This is real life, people. This is real life in Oregon. Look at that. Look at that. That's tax money well spent. That is tax dollars well spent. Right there. Look at that. You've been watching it over the months. Look at that. Look at that beautiful concrete work. Amazing. Amazing. Look at it. Look at that. Look at that. Yeah. Double cheeseburger. Living in paradise. All right. So I started to think about this. Wait a second. There is a matter of race and racism that all this was about, to some degree. This was going in the background the whole time. One, because Democrats kept making every possible thing about race and racism, and how much men hate women. All the men, they hate chicks. Look at that. They're waiting for me. They're like, uh-oh, what are you up to? Like, do you see we got human crap here. What's this? What do you humans leave here? They're like, God damn it. There's some kind of thing here. Look at that. Some bunch of foodses. Yeah. Say hello. All right. Look at that. Look at that. That's beautiful. So, I really... the fact that they were like, yeah, how do you factor in racism and misogyny? And so then I thought about it. I'm like, jokingly in my mind, what hits me? Oh, what are you talking about? Stuff black people don't like in Return of Kings? And then again, I'm like, that's what this keeps coming back to. That when the right started, and so all the journalists knew about this. That's the part that I think, especially on this channel, all the writers knew. They were on old Twitter at that time. So they all knew what they were seeing in hashtags. They all knew that there was this thing, the reactionaries. And they just didn't want to admit it was real. And that's the whole game. Because the reactionaries were such better writers. Their critiques were so hard-hitting. And then it went beyond that. So it wasn't just the NRX hashtag. But once, and this is the part that really, I had to go back and go, yeah, they were years late on that. The alternative right was something that, I had heard about, then looked into it because I'd stumbled on the MRAs. And there wasn't really very good stuff on that. But when these guys pop up, I'm like, okay, if their arguments are defensible, then I got to know what their arguments are. And nobody cared about that because this was like freaks. These guys are freaks. They're freakish ideas. And, well, what about it? They're this, they're that, they're freaks. And so I started to think about this, and I was like, yeah, I remember now. You couldn't get anyone really to acknowledge that there were obviously people who were looking at the alternative right, and they were young men that didn't even agree with it, but they wanted to know what these arguments were. This was like the new kind of crazy talk on the internet. And it garnered, to this day, it's still garnering. There's people whose whole careers on the internet were kind of based off of this. But when I thought about it, I'm like, yes. And from the beginning, all through the middle, even to when you couldn't find the alternative right blog spot any longer. And it's this on pieces on the internet, copied here and there. Various, maybe people published their collected essays. But this garnered a whole realm of publishing even. That if you look up certain titles on Amazon, it's like within 3 titles, you are neck deep in writers that, some of which straight up were writers for that blog. They were guest writers. You're looking at books that are pretty much Return of Kings writers. It doesn't take much anymore, and these guys they made it. They've made it as writers and thinkers. There's a lot of people that are, as history goes on, as time goes on, people are going to have to look back over recent history, and they're going to have to accept that it's like, no, these guys captured the minds of their countrymen, and even if you didn't like what they had to say, not only did they sell copy, but they captured the minds of their countrymen. And almost nobody on your side of thinking writes books anymore that even capture attention. No matter how hard PBS lobbies for you, no matter how much public universities, require that you're read, it's where the boys are, is this whole new realm of thinking about history, human ideas, and that, because key to it, one of the most, I really think about the fact that I have this book, and that this is considered like one of the most dangerous books that you could possess, and most likely the federal government actually probably has me on some list for owning a copy of Alexander Dugin's book. When most of the issue with him is he's like, how do we prevent having communism and fascism again? That's the whole thing about his entire philosophy. How do we not have totalitarian, authoritarian extremes develop out of some kind of thinking? What is it to be Russian? And that with all those, pretty much those two ideas, like I kind of, he without him saying the second one, because he had to ask, this has to be asked in that context of, well, if you're not going to have sort of this future Russian Federation based out of some kind of ideology, then it's got to be embraced out of what is it to be, and then one of these Russian Federation nations. Being that ideology is pretty much what ended up establishing so much of the world that they have had to deal with for the last 100 years. So with Americans, this actually is, he's very wordy. It's very difficult to get through, to chew through his work. But he did propagandize his ideas relatively well to the Western world before some part of the Pentagon was like, we got to put the kibosh on this guy. And to the point where they tried to assassinate him and killed his daughter via the Ukrainians. So it shows that there's ideas coming that are of the right, quote unquote, because they explore all these things that are against sort of this model that makes a type of one world governmental or sets of committees that run regions of the world, which and then so everybody's supposedly sharing in the decision making, but that's not it just, this is an unrealistic, this keeps proving unrealistic because of the interests that people have that are fundamentally very, very different. So, okay, what do? Well, we just iron everybody flat. Like Fooly Cooley, we just iron the human mind flat so that nobody's different anymore. And then it won't be so much work ruling these sheep, flat-headed sheep. There we go. You are like a sheep with a flat head. Oh, wow. That's cool. I didn't realize there was 2 floors like that. Okay. The new YMCA building. Ooh. The sky's all gray. Yeah, it looks like it's about to come down. Looks like it's like, this almost reminds me of like, kind of like when we get ice rain or the beginning of snow or something like that. But I think we're getting some in the mountains. The racial issues came from millennials as children and teenagers experiencing that integrated schools this was not odd by the time that they were kids, but that the black kids were shockingly likely to become very group-oriented and lash out at white males, whites in general, much more likely to say openly racially hostile things. This is what became something that started to reflect in what people talked about online when these are children. These are pretty much boys, that they're having this experience, and that, eventually they become adults. They're kind of not thinking much about it until BLM pops up. And BLM really makes a lot of people start getting very honest about their experience with diversity. I got much more honest by that time with my growing up in what was next to like maybe Hawaii and the most inner city parts of Manhattan. It was probably one of the most diverse places on the planet at the time. And so it was one of these things where I'm like, yeah, I get it. No, at certain ages, you form kind of tribal groups of teenage boys that get up to all kinds of nonsense, and that's why really we need it's so nice that things are a little more orderly. But by the time BLM's happening, what I had started to find out for years prior to it coming into existence, was that highly violent crime. So not a large increase of it, just that it had gone from sort of minor crime to people doing shockingly violent things. And that these were young black males doing this mostly to other young black males, but also to just kind of random people. Lots of mob violence and hospitalizing people that this person had no idea what happened. All of a sudden they're getting stomped out by a group of kids, and that local areas were just acting like this is all we need are more programs, whatever programs are supposed to be there. I mean, what is it, like macrame, sewing, what they need the gardening? No, we see like basketball. And with always it being like programs like midnight basketball. Why are your kids out at midnight? Why are you allowed to be a youth malingering around at nighttime? Because you're black. Oh, because you see city councils were getting really upset that malingering criminal black kids holding drugs and guns kept ending up getting frisked and thrown in the pokey. So it was embarrassing, because then you have these numbers that say, I, local leader, am the proud leader of a place that's full of crack dealing black kids who pack heat. So they would rather none of this information go any further than nowhere. And it's become the way that Democrats deal with crime. They just don't. It's complete poltroonery. It's total cowardice. It's literally bringing the Vaseline. They bring the Vaseline. Hey, I come here to get fucked in my ass. How do I let people? I want more people to do anal. It's just they believe in society being that memetical girl in white on the couch, surrounded by a bunch of black men in white. Yeah. So, that's what's going on. They kind of believe in this. Otherwise, they would believe in the idea of you punish criminals. And then there's behavior that there's why would anybody be doing that unless they were going to be getting up to criminality? But no, there's always some complete coward who needs to be rejected from the herd who's like, well, if this was a white person, and they always, and it's usually, and now everybody's identifying the trait that goes along with this most of the time: overweight, aging white women who are no longer really important to society. They're not at their big productive stage of creative energies. They're probably relatively smart. Not some special, just relatively smart, because that's the way women skew in intelligence. maybe a little smarter than the average because they've gotten into the field of education or something like that, something that required you actually being able to take the time to study and do that kind of work. Got to give credit where credit's due. But that they don't understand culture because they don't really, they haven't experienced it. It's something you kind of have to experience. You can't kind of artificially just soak it up. You can't download it. You've got to see how sort of Archie Bunker makes sense decade after decade after decade and sort of remanifests in society because he's a type of character. That's why you could relate to him. It's rapport. Democrats have forgotten that. That's no longer a part of their thinking. It's no longer a part of their language. They think they're kind of above that. They could just sort of impose character types. They think that's the way life is. You just impose some kind of concept, and eventually the flat-headed sheep just go along with it. It's like Lassie. They'll follow the herding dog. It's a very the way of looking at people where you use the term masses, which I remember when I finally saw that there was, I'd hear this that this was specifically like something out of especially the Marxist schools of thinking, that I'm like, why are they using that term? Because it's kind of insulting, really. The masses. Like, what is that even? And then I'm like, who is that supposed to be referring to? Now that I think even more about it, like, who would that refer to, really? So yeah, the racial stuff, because the Democrats and the progressives and their journalists, especially the real left, the ones who knew something about it, like Jared Holt and stuff like that, these guys would not take seriously issues about immigration, race, and culture. And so Destiny is still one of these people who doesn't. Hassan takes solidly the kind of cultural Marxist way of approaching it, that blame Whitey. It's always Whitey. It's no more complicated than that. Easy, simple as. But then it's people like the Black Trump vote. They're the people. Those are fellas that they have much more complicated views of this. Where they're marrying out of the race. Why? Because they're bred to marry outside of the race. That's how breeding works. Some groups are extremely sort of unique almost in taking in males from other groups very, very well. And that males who are attracted to those clusters of genes will tend to find that culture extremely appealing. This is one, like the Filipino people are like this, that black men who marry Filipino women are very happy with the family life. It's just something about some kind of way that these two groups work very well as a pair. And that's why you see that coupling so often in the United States. It's just that kind of thing. Once people started to explore these ideas, and that the people who were in the genomics area started to say, oh, well, no, this makes sense, and they started to explain why, then that changed everything about all discussions of culture, peoples, history, racial stuff, but only on the right. Nobody could handle it on the left. The left could not handle that type of talk. The big one, genomics. Nobody could handle the idea of bred for traits. Whether you like the outcome or you don't like the outcome, the idea that there groups of people show traits because at some point they were bred for, that upset. There was, because all liberal theories on social stuff and it all falls apart once you face that issue that's now scientifically understood issue, the fundamental part of this is how genomics works. This is how genetics works, and so and then this is how then you get clusters of groups of genes, and why certain groups have very specific medical issues. How did that cluster out of all these bred for traits, that this was something that's some part of it that then became, like redheads and cancer. It's not even skin cancer. That's not it's other cancers that shockingly likely will kill them. It just happens to be something unique to the cluster of genes that gives you a ginger. Black women and difficult childbirth, cluster of genes issue. There's not a way around it. There's some advantages, obviously, to having, not being, sensitive to sunlight, but it comes with other trade-offs. Yeah. Just some thoughts on that later.